welcome back to a very special episode of the East Anglia Traditional Music Trust's Big Sky Traditions, as this is the first of a series documenting the Vaughan Williams Folk Project. You may have already heard a bit about this project from various social media posts that we have put out already, or from the short introduction podcast before this one, but if you haven't, fret not. For the course of this first episode, we will catch you up with everything you need to know about all the amazing stuff that's happened so far. A huge thank you must be said as well to the National Lottery Heritage Fund that has provided the funding to make this project possible. Now, before the project was even officially launched, events were already underway, including in August 2022, Folk East. Here, a wonderful talk was given by Alan Helsden, joined by fiddle player extraordinaire Chris Holderness, looking into Vaughan Williams' Letters from King's Lynn. Here's some excerpts of it. Enjoy.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this sunny Folk East. Yay! So we're all from and working with the East Anglian Traditional Music Trust, who are based in Stowmarket. Brilliant charity. Come and see us at the instrument stall to find out what we're doing. There's Traditional Music Day coming up in a couple of weeks' time and loads of other stuff. But today is all about Vaughan Williams. So the Trust has been really successful in getting a grant from the National Lottery Heritage Fund to celebrate the folk song collecting of Vaughan Williams right across the eastern counties of East Anglia. But today we've got a talk all about Vaughan Williams collecting in Norfolk. And we've got two amazing experts here. We've got Alan Helsden, who's spent years researching Vaughan Williams collecting and is a real expert on everything he ever did in Norfolk. And we've got fantastic local musician Chris Holderness, who's an expert both in his own right as a researcher and as a brilliant musician. So I give you Alan and Chris.
Thank you, Nikki. I'd love it if people would come and sit at the front, because there's this awful great hole I'm talking to. So there's some lovely comfy carpets down here. Please do come and sit. I'll just introduce, there are two people on my left. Chris is the one with the violin, and the other one is some sort of statue, I think. I'm going to... Shall I sing this to the music? That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Can you all hear me all right? Sorry about the row. Now, we're going to go back to the beginning, which for me was 2005. In that year, Jill Bennett, who you may know as BBC Radio Norfolk's West Norfolk producer, decided that it was 100 years since Vaughan Williams came to King's Lynn, where she lived. And it was 200 years since Norfolk's other great son, or Norfolk's greatest son, defeated the Spanish and French fleet off the south coast of Spain. So we did a Trafalgar and a Vaughan Williams concert, and we had to turn people away. It was so popular. We had to do it again in another pub's upstairs room. And again, it was completely full. And we had to do it a third time. So we decided that there was obviously a great deal of interest in the subject of Vaughan Williams coming to King's Lynn. And the three of us sat down and a few years later decided that we would produce the definitive book about Vaughan Williams in King's Lynn. Well, the book's not out yet, but it should be out this year. And the story, very roughly, is that we divided the work up into three parts. Jill Bennett would talk or write about Vaughan Williams' use of these folk songs in his works, notably, of course, the Norfolk Rhapsodies and other pieces. A lady called Liz James, who some of you may have heard of, had already written about The Captain's Apprentice, one of the songs that Vaughan Williams noted. She was a librarian in King's Lynn and knew the place really well. She was going to write about the singers and the background, because the community that Vaughan Williams specifically went to was called the North End, and it was a fishing community, and it was like a village within King's Lynn. People who married out of the community were often frowned upon. It was a very self-sufficient, very fiercely independent area of Lynn. And I was going to do the songs. And what surprised me when we were doing this concert was that I could not find a definitive list of how many songs Vaughan Williams had collected, how many songs there were altogether, and so on. And I'm a list person, I'm afraid, so I thought, right, I'll make a list. And I ended up with 86 songs and 4 tunes, which is quite a surprise. Now, They were all in a book. It was a book called The Works of Vaughan Williams by Michael Kennedy. It came out in 1964, and he had quite assiduously gone through Vaughan Williams' manuscript books and written down all the songs that he found in there in the right order, noting the place and the singer. But it was all part of this huge tome of the official sort of list of Vaughan Williams' works. He worked on it with Vaughan Williams before Vaughan Williams died. And so I started with that, and as I say, ended up with about 90 items. We then sang some of these, and then I started to collect words. Now, Vaughan Williams, I was having this discussion with somebody a little earlier, he was really only interested in the tunes. That's 100 and odd years ago, and things were different then. But he was after what he called the soul of English music. He was a young composer trying to make his way, trying not to write German music, which was all the everybody's favourite at the time, but there were English composers like Parry and Elgar and so on, but he wanted his own style, and he joined the committee of the English Folk Song Society in 1904 when it was more or less moribund, and he went in 1905, or sorry, he started in December 1903 noting folk songs, and he went all the way through 1904, and then in 1905 came to King's Lynn in January. Now, one phrase you're going to hear a lot, I'm afraid, is "we don't know why." The problem is he didn't keep a diary. He wrote very little about his experiences afterwards. He gave a couple of talks when he mentioned things, but we really don't know much about why he was here. Now, my theory is this. When the Folk Song Society first started, the first journal came out in 1899. The secretary was a lady called Kate Lee. Unfortunately, she became ill and had to give up the job, and the society was more or less defunct. And then Lucy Broadwood took over as secretary. She was a bit of a live wire. Vaughan Williams and Cecil Sharp were co-opted onto the committee, and things took off in a big way. And of course, they continued. Then in 1931, they joined with the Dance Society to become the EFDAS we all know and love today. Kate Lee, in 1897, came to Norfolk on holiday. And she went specifically to North Norfolk and specifically to Wells. And she went down to the harbour and she said to the fishermen, "Do you know any songs?" Which is probably not the best way of starting, but she did. And they said, "Blast, ma'am, no, we don't know any songs. You want to go to Sheringham." They sing in Sheringham. So as far as I know, she didn't go to Sheringham. Perhaps she didn't have a bike, I don't know. But she certainly went to Baconsthorpe, which is not far from Wells. And as she was walking through Baconsthorpe, she heard this bloke whistling. And she thought, that sounds like a nice little folk song. And she went up to him and said, "Pardon me, young man," you know, the accent. "What is that you're whistling?" He said, "Well, that's a dance tune, ma'am." She said, "Could you whistle it again while I write it down?" And he did, and she did. His name was Joe Skillings, and she wrote this tune down. And she said, What's it called?" And he said, "Ma'am, that's called the High Road to Lynn." And she thought, "Oh, well, we're not far from King's Lynn. It must be a local tune." So she wrote High Road to Lynn. And sure enough, in the first journal, she made a horrible blunder. She printed this tune. And it's about number 3 or 4 in the journal, the third or fourth thing that the English Folk Song Society published. It turned out to be not a folk song, it was a dance tune, and it was Scottish. And it was actually called The High Road to Linton. But Joe Skillings, coming from Baconsthorpe, that High Road to Linton. And that's all she got. So she made a bit of a blunder there. But she had in her head, and she printed it in the first journal, that they sang songs in Sheringham. Now, whether that was one of the things that brought Vaughan Williams to North Norfolk or not, I don't know. It's very, very difficult to tell. We just don't know. The other possible reason is this. When the Folk Song Society got going, they put an article in a national paper saying, we are the English Folk Song Society. If you know or hear of other people singing English folk songs, please write them down and send them to us. If you can't, we'll come and write them down for you, which is a bit of a dangerous thing to do, but they did. Now, we don't know if there was an answer to that or not. There might have been, and it might have been the Reverend John Newnham, who was the vicar at Tilney All Saints and Tilney St Lawrence. If you don't know your Fens geography, they're about 4 miles from King's Lynn to the southwest. And he may have answered this letter, and Vaughan Williams may have gone there for that reason. On the other hand, Lucy Broadwood might have said, Rafe, Norfolk, go. We just don't know. So the first place he went to was not King's Lynn, it was the two Tilneys. He may have had his bike with him. His wife Ursula said in her biography of him that he took his bike when looking for folk songs a lot of the time. He could have got off his bike, off the train in King's Lynn from London and cycled to Tilney. There was a railway line in those days. It went through Clenchwarton and it went over to the west, the Midland and Great Northern. He might have got the train to Clenchwarton, just don't know. But that's where he started, in the Tilneys. And one of the people he met was Stephen Pole. All right? The Reverend Newnham introduced him to two people, his verger and Stephen Pole in St Lawrence, who was both a singer and played fiddle for the local dancers. Chris will now introduce us to one of Stephen Pole's dance tunes. Chris.
Yes, one of the 4 that was taken down was Trip to the Cottage, which is a very well-known jig, country dance tune, very common throughout Britain and Ireland, and actually is used for the dance of the same name, which is a sort of circle dance with a great deal of progression running through it. And this is the version of the tune, of which there are many, which came from Stephen Pole.
The full recording of Alan's wonderful talk is available to watch on the EATMT's YouTube channel, which I'll link in the description. But if you're a pure podcast fanatic, it'll be put up online soon as a separate podcast. A huge part of the Vaughan Williams project, and one that I'm particularly excited about, is our Young Musicians Showcase. For this part of the project, we've selected 9 young musicians who'll be mentored by folk musicians Finn Collison and Emma Beach from November 2022 to September 2023, where they'll be creating a musical showcase using folk music and songs collected across East Anglia by Ralph Vaughan Williams to be performed at Folk East and Traditional Music Day in 2023. To kick this part of the project off, a youth moot was held at Folk East, where young musicians at the festival were invited along to learn a folk song collected by Vaughan Williams and reinterpret it. Here's a little excerpt from that session.
But yeah, we're working on this project, and we basically got given this little book. And in this book, it's a kind of collection, like Finn was saying, of all of these folk songs by Vaughan Williams. And we were having a flick through on our day, and we found this one called 40 Miles. And basically in our session today, we just wanted to create like a version with all of you, because at these things you get to hear so much music, but you're all great and you can all play. So yeah, we're basically just gonna make our own version. So I hope that sounds all good. Shall we start by learning the song? Yeah? If you were happy to sing, we would love it. We don't want to sing by ourselves. If you don't want to, it's absolutely fine. You can either play along on your instrument. If you get stuck, give us a wave. Chordy people on guitars, do you want to just listen the first time and then you can start to join in, or Finn can give you chords and stuff? Would that be all right? Yeah? Or you can make your own up. So I'm going to sing a line, and then if you guys all sing it back, that'll be great. Okie dokie. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Could you give me a couple in so I know what key we're in?
So we're in.
Great. Okay. Are we ready? Off we go. Okay, so I'm going to go. On yonder hill and there it stood. Your turn, ready? Off we go. On yonder hill and there it stood. Should we do that a couple of times just all together? Ready? Let's loop it. Off we go. On yonder hill, and there it stood. Fin solo, and again. On yonder hill, and there it stood. We're going to do it one more time, and I'm going to carry on. So, are you ready together? On yonder hill, and there it stood, a neat little cottage near to the wood. The words.
We'd like to sort of give you a little bit about this song. So that's the first verse of the song. As we said, this is one of the songs that was collected by Vaughan Williams. And it was collected by Vaughan Williams in 1910 in Raydon, near Southwold, so just a few miles away from here. And it was collected. The person that Vaughan Williams collected it from was a man called Charles Newby. And we didn't know anything about Charles Newby until 2 days ago. And Alex from the East Anglian Traditional Music Trust sent us a lovely document with all sorts of information about him. And we discovered that he sang it to Vaughan Williams right at the very end of his life. So he was 89 or 90 years old, and he died just a few months after Vaughan Williams collected it. So if Vaughan Williams had turned up a few months later, then maybe we wouldn't have this song to sing. So we'd like to do something with it. We'd like to know a little bit about what we've not given you very much so far, but what does it mean to you? Does it mean anything to you? Does it make you think of anything? What do you want to know?
What do you think it's about?
Yeah,
that kind
it's
of
a good
thing.
question.
We did an exercise yesterday where we said, what did we do? We said, what does this picture and words mean to you? There's a nice little picture here of where Mr. Bly used to live. He was the first resident, if you wanted to know. So basically, I'm going to read the words to you one more time, and then I want you all to come up with either a word that sticks out to you, a question you might have about it, like Finn said, something you want to know more about, or what it makes you feel. We both had very different answers, so there is literally no wrong. You could be like, it made me think of a penguin. I might be like, okay, why? But it's not wrong. Okay, are we ready? So the words are, on yonder hill and there it stood, a neat little cottage near to the wood, where I have never been, oh, where I have never been. So we're gonna take 15 seconds, 30 seconds, who knows? Just have a think in your head, try and come up with something. How about you, Phoebe?
I want to know if he wants to go to the cottage, because I reckon he does. He's like, I've never been yet. So why is he singing about it?
Yeah, I like that. That's really cool. Nice.
I was intrigued by the word the and the one that comes before would, because that suggests, it sounds like he hasn't been to the house before, but it sounds like a familiar wood. It's the wood, like maybe he knows that wood really, really well.
I like it.
That's cool. Nice.
The wood. Which wood?
Yeah, which wood? Cool.
You have anything?
Yeah, the kind of bit about where I have never been to the cottage, it kind of makes it sound like maybe as a child growing up he kind of always wanted to go there, like that was kind of his dream house, but he never got to go there before, and he's just kind of writing about his wanting to go there.
Oh, I like that.
Nice. Lovely.
I want to know where the cottage is and like what it looks like.
Nice.
Nice, lovely.
I just want to know how big the wood is.
Ah,
Yes.
yes. Good question.
Yeah. Is it like a tree or?
Right.
Great.
Chug on the G again. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, and. Hey. On yonder hill, and there it stood, a neat little cottage near to the wood, where I have never been, oh, where I have never been. A very big wood the house lives in, the very Wednesday the trees last and raining, and little George bakes his pies, where little George bakes his pies. Minor. Yay! Nice one, guys.
Woo!
Good stuff.
Thank you all for coming.
Brilliant.
That was fun.
Thanks for
I
that.
like that version of this song.
Following on from the success of Folk East, we finally reached launch day. Held in October, the event was the perfect way to officially kick off the project with a fascinating talk by folk group Potiphar's Apprentices, featuring tales of Vaughan Williams' time in East Anglia and loads of live music. Just to give you a little taste of that, here's a little excerpt.
Here's adieu to old England, farewell. Here's adieu to 10,000s of woes. If the world had been ended before we were born, our sorrows we ne'er should have known. If the world had been ended before we were born, our sorrows we ne'er should have known.
Come Buy Me a Hawk and a Hound was sung to Vaughan Williams by Mrs. Mary Humphreys, not that Mary Humphreys, different one, on April the 25th, 1904. Now, she learned most of her songs from her grandparents, so we know that these songs go back quite a long way. And in fact, although you might think that this is about transportation, the song actually dates from before transportation was implemented. So this is a case where the prisoner is waiting to hear if he's going to be hanged. But Vaughan Williams came to be collecting songs from an old lady in Ingrave almost by accident. He grew up in Surrey after his father died, because the family moved there. He knew the Broadwoods, and he was interested in folk song, as were many young musicians and composers around about that time, not just in England but throughout Europe. So you have Sibelius and Grieg, you've got Smetana, Chopin, you've got Rimsky-Korsakov, you've got this was a movement of young Turks in a way, who were looking at different music. There was a feeling that it seemed slightly odd that people should be trained in German and Italian music and not in English music. Vaughan Williams was particularly interested in church music and in folk music. And he was lecturing on the history of folk song. He believed at that time that folk song was hardly sung at all these days. But when he went to lecture in Brentwood in 1903, he came across Georgina Heatley, who was the youngest daughter of the rector of Ingrave, and she was aware that there was that songs were being sung in her village, and she was passing notes to Vaughan Williams during the course of these lectures about songs that she knew of and people who sang them. It wasn't until December of that year that he went to tea at the rectory, and the following day, so he went to tea on the Saturday. On the Sunday, he met Charles Potiphar, he met Mrs. Horsnell, he met George Sewell, and somebody else, I forgot. Yeah, somebody else that day. Oh, Emma Turner, of course. Yeah, silly me. Yeah. And he collected, I think, 11 songs from these 5 people on the first day. So on the Sunday, he visited Charles Potiphar in his cottage in Rectory Lane, which is, as you can see, just down the road from the rectory. And yeah, Charles Potiphar sang 7 songs that day. And the first of those songs was the strange and haunting Bushes and Briars. And Vaughan Williams said, an old man began to sing and put all my thoughts about folk song at rest, because he realised that, that folk song and folk music was still alive. The third song that Mr. Potiphar sang that day was a version of the Sheffield Apprentice, which we're about to do for you now. A powerful song about entrapment. It was the first song we performed together, and it's the reason why we call ourselves Potiphar's Apprentices, because we felt we had so much to learn from Charles Potiphar. And you want to say?
We're going to do that now.
We're going to do that now.
Yeah. Normally when Sue gets to the bit it says an old man began to sing, I usually go, "How do?" at that point, but I missed my cue there.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's interesting that the story of... I think Charles Potter was supposed to be illiterate, but I'm convinced that he would have known the story of Potiphar in the Bible and Potiphar's wife, which is also a story of entrapment, like the song Sheffield Apprentice is a story of entrapment. So, it's a sort of a mark for the sophistication of these apparently illiterate guys who seem so kind of wise and deep in their learning about song, really. Okay. I was brought up in Sheffield, place of high degree. My parents doted upon me. They had no child but me. I roamed around for pleasure, just where my fancy led, till I was bound apprentice, and all my joys were fled.
Just like the talks at Folk East, the full talk by Potiphar's Apprentices can be found online on the EATMT's YouTube channel, alongside individual clips of various tunes from the talk. And with that, we reach the present, where only a few weeks ago, in November 2022, the Vaughan Williams in East Anglia Folk Conference was held in Stowmarket, featuring a whole host of fantastic speakers giving talks on all aspects of Vaughan Williams' time in East Anglia, as well as some brilliant live music from Alex Bartholomew and Alan Helston, which you actually heard at the beginning of this podcast. Unfortunately, we just don't have time to showcase all the brilliant talks, but films of the event will be up very soon on the Trust's YouTube channel for all to watch. Just to give you a taster of the event, here is a clip of author, historian and musician Caroline Davison giving her talk on Vaughan Williams' early life.
Two of the main questions I wanted to answer when I began researching Vaughan Williams' 1905 trip to King's Lynn, which gradually developed into my book, was how did Vaughan Williams become interested in collecting folk song, and how was it that he ended up in King's Lynn? So before we hear in detail about the songs he collected in the various counties of East Anglia, which we're going to hear the rest of the day, I thought it might be useful to explore his earlier life. To help us understand the context for the folk song collecting he began in earnest in December 1903 in Ingrave, Essex, when he collected the song Bushes and Briars and recognised, quote, something new yet absolutely familiar. After this event, he wrote down over 800 songs in his notebooks before the outbreak of World War I, a collection of melodies which were to have a profound effect on his composition. Next slide, please. So to find the origins of his interest in folk song, we need to go back to his childhood. In the two main sources of autobiographical notes on his musical life, Vaughan Williams identified the Cherry Tree Carol as his first introduction to folk song at the age of about 10. He remembered that his reaction was, quote, more than simple admiration for a fine tune. Though at the time he didn't understand the sense of intimacy which he always felt when he encountered a work of art. As he described it, here's something I've known all my life. So every Christmas his family would visit an aunt who was, quote, much bitten by the William Morris movement. She frescoed sunflowers on her walls and put bottled glass in her windows. And one of the byproducts of this movement, this is what Vaughan Williams said, was the cult of the Christmas carol. He described his aunt as a first-rate musician, and her children were musical too, and they would gather around the pianoforte in the evening to sing carols from Stainer and Bramley, a book of carols. And the tune of the Cherry Tree Carol, one of several traditional airs used in the book, remained, quote, a fragrant possession all his life. And now we're going to attempt to play this little tune, if the technology allows. So that's just the tune that started him on his journey. So Vaughan Williams doesn't name the aunt, but a story retold in the biography by his second wife, Ursula, about dressing up for a Christmas party, identifies the family as the Massingbirds. And the aunt, who was actually a cousin by marriage to Vaughan Williams's mother, was Emily Massingbird, who we can see in this very striking portrait here in 1878. So perhaps, when Vaughan Williams was about 6. So that's what she would have been looking like when they were singing these carols. At that time, the Massingbirds were living in the Red House in Bournemouth, an arts and crafts influenced house that Emily had commissioned. And it still stands in Bournemouth, that's it, taken a couple of years ago. It's a Bournemouth suburb, still has its bottled glass and a large double-height room, especially designed for meetings, theatre and musical performance. The stated aim of the Stainer and Bramley book, Christmas Carols New and Old, was to, quote, obtain traditional carol tunes and words which have escaped the researches of previous collectors. It contained 14 tunes listed as traditional. Published first in the 1860s, the publications concerned to preserve old tunes fitted into a growing movement to conserve the countryside and rural culture that was seen to be under threat from industrialisation, which culminated in the establishment of numerous conservation organisations, such as these ones listed here. Vaughan Williams's childhood experience at his aunt's was part of the progressive, nonconformist intellectual milieu in which he grew up. Emily Massingbird, part of the progressive circle, was no ordinary aunt. She was, in fact, an active campaigner for the advancement of women's interests. That's what she described it as, including women's suffrage and temperance. She founded the Pioneer Club in London to provide a meeting ground for women workers of all kinds. And the members were identified by numbers rather than names in an attempt to remove class discrimination. The club's motto was, "They say, what say they? Let them say." This sort of motto of defiant independence was over the entrance to the club, but was also, next slide please, painted in large writing on a wall of the room in the Bournemouth house where the Stainer and Bramley carols were sung by the young cousins. But you can see where the writing is at the bottom of the balcony there. As well as directly introducing Vaughan Williams to traditional melodies, Massingbird may have modelled for him a defiance in the face of discouragement from his Darwin-Wedgwood relations, who declared he was a foolish young man who would go on working at music when he was so hopelessly bad at it. The Massingbird family supported his musical ambitions, and it was Emily's son Stephen who passed on the message of independent thinking when he told Vaughan Williams that Parry declared that a composer must write music as his musical conscience demands, an idea which stayed with him as a principle throughout his career. Given this cultural context, it was not by chance that Emily Massingbird introduced the Stainer and Bramley Book of Carols to her children and their cousins. And as a result, the sound of traditional music was embedded in Vaughan Williams's consciousness and sparked a small flame in his imagination. After experiencing the power of this early influence, it was a rational response for him to later champion, along with Cecil Sharp, the idea of introducing folk song into the school curriculum.
Hey, on yonder hill and there it stood, beneath the little cottage near to the wood, where I have never been.
Going into the next phase of the project, there's loads of fantastic stuff coming up, and to keep up to date with it all, do go and follow the East Anglia Traditional Music Trust on all social media platforms. The next episode of this podcast will be coming out in the new year. We'll be meeting our youth mentors, Finn and Emma, as well as the young musicians involved in the project to hear about their experience so far and what they've discovered about Vaughan Williams, and maybe even perhaps a few tunes. But till then, thank you all for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.